Catus Maximus here. This is just a review of this old Montgomery Ward Powr-Kraft vibration sander. This is a brushless linear sander. And so I thought that was kind of neat, is that there were a few old school brushless corded power tools. So brushless has been experimented with since before modern times, we'll say that. This works like an electric shaver. They actually have a huge 1.5 amp. Like 175 watt transformer in there, and it just yanks back and forth through the 60 cycles of the AC, pulling on each one of these essentially springs. And when it does that, it causes the pad surface to rock back and forth in exactly a straight line, and that's actually what kind of attracted me to this. That and the fact that since it doesn't use a rotating motor, it uses a transformer. It's a few pounds. It's like 3 pounds. It's a surprisingly heavy sander. As a matter of fact, for a finish sander on flat surfaces, just the weight of it alone would probably apply just sufficient pressure and be able to get your sanding done without having to press on it. Obviously, if you're doing overhead work or that type of vertical work, it may get a little bit tiresome. But I thought this was neat for exactly 2 reasons. One, it is brushless, so it should be pretty reliable. It's literally just one piece of wire coming into the wall, going through the transformer, and back out again. And 2, what I thought would be most important is the fact that it is a true linear sander. There is no side-to-side motion, no linear component. Since it uses a transformer that's vibrating, all of the vibration is also exactly linear. And so it's kind of hard to find sanders that actually will do that. And I can imagine quite a few situations with professional or craftsperson woodworkers or just craftspeople in general who may want a sander that literally is just like having a block that you move back and forth. For a while ago, I picked up this old Makita here, which actually happens to also be 1.5 amps. It's surprising that the same power brushed rotational motor in this sander and this sander, both of these are the same amount of power, but this one's huge. This is a 3rd sheet Makita, but it had this switch which allows it to go linear, but since it does have an orbiting function, it still has just a little bit of a component where it moves side to side. So was pretty intrigued by this. Stamped aluminum foot, but it is held by steel. These clamps for the sandpaper aren't the most robust. It is an all aluminum foot, but they do have a decent felt pad in there. So let's give it a whirl, and I'll put a piece of whatever I got here. Pretty rough, 50 grit. I find that you can tear belt sander belts real square. It's surprising. First, we'll give this a run. It's a little bit noisy, but I'd have to say it's probably the same or a little bit less than modern finish sanders. The switch actually rattles itself and makes quite a bit of the noise. And it does. It sounds just like an electric shaver, and you can see how the pad, here we go, moves exactly back and forth. Real small motions, but truly totally linear. So I think I got this pad probably torn. Maybe I got it just right. Let me try to get this applied here. Somewhat annoyingly, you really have to tear the sandpaper a real accurate distance because it has these little feet that it rocks up on. Barely any space. So this piece of sandpaper's got to be within like a 1/4 inch or an 1/8 of an inch of exactly the right length. And I tore it at a little bit of an angle and just could barely get it in there. It's actually pretty tight. What I thought was funny is it's for household use. So I suppose that after a long period of time, this may start to get pretty warm. And that would be the only thing to be aware of. But it's funny they say household use because it's brushless, and the way it's designed, would basically last for nearly forever. You might have to figure out some way to replace the felts every once in a while. We'll see how it works out on this block of wood. I even have some red paint here. And first, I'm just going to go just try to remove a little bit just to demonstrate the linear sanding. See how quick it is. Probably not too great. There goes my piece of sandpaper. There we go. Basically, the only way to get this tight enough is when you fold the piece of sandpaper over, you're going to have to fiddle holding this and then use a flathead screwdriver to really tuck it in there to get this in there tight enough. So maybe it will work a little better, and I'll move back and forth a little more to clean up more of the debris if I plugged it in. Let's try that a little more. There we go. That switch could use a little bit of work. So it's a bit noisy. I found that if I just let it use its own weight versus pressing on it, it seemed to work just about as well, and giving it more back and forth motion. I don't know how much more efficient this is than really using like a sanding block, but I kind of like the idea of this, and the way it's supported by 2 metal brackets and a pretty short plate, it seems to be reasonably flat. And just the way it's absolutely linear, so it is similar to using a block, and there could be some situations where it's just easier to use something like this than it is just to do it manually. It's probably duration of time short work with a hand by hand with a block would be fine, but if you have some surfaces, some fine type old table or whatever that you're trying to really just get this going, then you may be more opted to use something like this, because then you're not having to use your own pressure. It is, in that sense, it's just a power tool that all you have to do is just focus on just pushing it back and forth in a straight line, because you know the pad's moving absolutely perfectly in a straight line, and gives you that distinct advantage of like hand block sanding, where it's just absolutely with the grain. And I think that's a pretty unique advantage. I don't know how many linear sanders, finish sanders, are made these days, but this thing also being brushless means it's going to last and last, so the lifetime of the wire. You have to replace a few cords if you use it, but if you don't drop it and smash the ABS housing, this switch is just like a... It's kind of interesting, but this is just like a regular standard old electronic switch. I mean, this switch is just easily available on, online. This would be the kind of thing that would be on Radio Shack. You just recognize the style of, wow, it's just a simple basic switch with a little molding in the housing. So that's the only other issue that can happen, because this is just a transformer. It doesn't even, it's a, I guess it would be called a solenoid, because it doesn't even have 2 coils of wire. It's just a single coil of wire, an electromagnet that's just designed to be able to be continuously operated while plugged into a wall socket, and it just yanks back and forth. And it's really not that noisy if you kind of hold onto the power switch. It is definitely quieter than modern orbital finish sanders. Some of those things are just surprisingly loud for how small they are. And this thing is great. It has no moving parts, so it's not blowing dust around. That's another distinct advantage I was noticing, is there isn't a big cloud of dust, because I don't have a big fan just stirring it up everywhere. All the dust just kind of sits on the material and just falls down. So I thought, there's another distinct advantage. You don't need a vacuum with this, because it isn't blowing dust everywhere to begin with. So who's to say that all old stuff is worthless? Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.